Good morning.
Good morning, Brian.
We are up to session 4 of Conversations with My Dad,
Right.
Chuck Anderson.
And they've been transformative already. I shed my facial hair
Indeed.
and I've elevated my stature.
And how's the energy output feeling this morning?
I think I got more energy than I've had in a while, which
Good.
is saying,
Well, I mean,
Lot.
it's been almost 2 months now since our last
yeah, it's
session
been a
here.
while. Yeah.
You know, you kind of had a little bit of a rough patch there with everything that you've been going through.
Yeah, and traveling and everything. It's shout out to my granddaughters, Elise and Isabel, for the graduation from high school,
And Zoe as well.
and Zoe as well.
Mhm. It's a epic time in the family history.
Epic time.
Grandkids start graduating high school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all part of the way of wonder, you know.
The way of wonder. Let's delve into the way of wonder a bit today. So in our last conversation, we touched on the way of wonder a little bit. We talked about the collapsing of waveforms and how reality can sometimes choose for you what's going on, the illusion of control, how that ties into the framework of painful, difficult, and complicated. But where we left off in our last session, we were talking about Robert Heinlein's Job, A Comedy of Justice. And at that point, you were just about halfway through the book, and you had shared that there was something significant about the trucker leaving a bit of money in his coat pocket. I'd like to delve into that a little bit more. I have my own recollections at that point in the story, but I wanted to, being that you've had a more recent and fresh read through, circle back on that and get your take, as well as, you know, kind of where you got to as you came to the end of the book. And you had mentioned that there were some things, that themes and episodes that had happened in your original read through that were too close to home for you really to pick up and recognize. But now that you've had some distance, they hit you differently. So let's start there, and we'll kind of work that back towards the way of wonder.
Well, let's start with that the scene with the gold piece in the pocket, because that's part of the way of wonder. Is that when the universe answers a need, it's often just enough, just in time. It's been my experience, you know, in the story we told about the money for the house and all of that was just what we needed, just in time. And I see that over and over again. Is you know, just in time is a management system that's used throughout the world. So you get it just in time, and the universe works that way. And that's part of the thing we talk about. Mythogenics is really about relationship with the universe. How is our relationship? One of the things that a lot of people had experience with, and maybe still are having experience, it's not as prevalent in the news, is this idea of the secret, that you can manifest what it is that you're seeking if you have the right approach. And that's very closely related to the way of wonder. The way of wonder is a way of integrating all of this what I call metaverse. It's bigger than the universe. You know, universe is a concept we inherited from the Greeks. Metaverse is more of the inclusion of the quantum reality of life. And a lot of the things that happen at our, let's say, a meta level are results of what's going on at quantum level. You talk about collapsing a waveform, and that's kind of what the whole nature of the secret is collapsing the waveform in a mutually advantageous way for ourself and the universe, or metaverse. I'm going to call it I'm going to stick with the universe, but I'm mythogenically speaking, it's a mythogenic metaverse. But the language can get confusing for people, so we'll just stick with universe. So the idea of the way of wonder is the unfolding of our interaction with the universe. And I'm proposing that I've seen 4 particular modes of interfacing with the universe. One is what I call the mode of unity, where I and the universe are one. There is no separation. The second mode is integration, where I'm in relationship with the universe and I'm in bargaining. You know, if you give me this, I'll give you that. The third mode of it is intentionality, intention, which is what the secret is a mode of interfacing with the way of wonder in terms of specific expectations and outcomes. And the fourth matter is what I would call initiative, where we take initiative and we go and do something, and then we ask the universe to support us in our undertaking. It's not waiting for anything, it's going and doing. It's rather impulsive. And so these 4 modes are ways we can interface with the way of wonder. We don't know that for sure that what makes it wonder is it's not cause and effect. It's cause and causes and causes, and realizing results sometimes that you have to examine at a level differently than we expect. We get results, but they may be very, very different than what we anticipated. And so that's what makes it wonderful, is oftentimes it exceeds whatever our expectations might have been. So in terms of moving forward with this idea of getting what we want, getting what we need, and examining our relationship with the universe based on all of that is part of what the mythogenic path is all about. Is how do we explain, how do we understand, how do we realize the different things that are occurring to us on an everyday basis.
Well, and I think harkening back to this conversation of Job, A Comedy of Justice, and the Robert Heinlein book, as an illustrator of some of these points is helpful in the dynamics that he introduces into that story. I like this concept of a metaverse rather than a universe. He's kind of sliding between different realities.
Right.
And, delving back into, the Strucker, leaving him some money, the currency shifts. With each shift that he has in his reality, the money that he's holding on to and is physically on his person travels with him and is no good when he wakes up the next day.
It's a lot like the film Groundhog Day. He wakes up in a similar and yet different reality. He's not grounded in whatever's going to be the new. It's always constant discovery. What is this new dimension that I'm in? Which is really the truth of all our lives. We just assume we're in the same dimension that we left yesterday. But what if we're not? What if there are many, many pathways? And there's a quantum theory that suggests exactly that there are a variety of pathways we shift from. And our consciousness is part of the discovery of whatever path we happen to be on. It's a little esoteric for many people, but I think it's worth considering that sometimes it feels like the universe changed. What changed? Why are things different than they were yesterday or a week ago or a month ago? And a lot of people feel like, it's in the Psalms, actually, that why are you, God, different than you were before? Why did you change? Well, maybe it's not changing of the deity, it's just changing of the dimension. And our job is to be flexible and open up to whatever the new discovery is that we're going to be um, considering. We wonder there once again. Sometimes it's what we want, sometimes it's more than what we want, and frequently it's not exactly what we expected. So how do we curb our disappointment when the universe, shall we say, under delivers what it was that we were hoping to experience? Does that make sense?
I mean, to me, being that we've had multiple conversations around some of this, I think I've got a slightly deeper understanding, but I mean, let's dive in a bit. And again, let's use, this Job discussion as a framework
Sure.
to kind of shape what we're talking about, right? Because that is something that's tangible in this world. Someone can go pick up a copy, read through it, and connect it back to these points that you're making, right? So now that you've gone through the entire novel, you've now finished it on your reread. What's your impression and your takeaways of the book itself? And you had mentioned that there were certain episodes within the book that in your first read through were just a little bit too close to home for you to really recognize and realize the power and the validity of them. I'm curious to find out, what were those specific episodes? How did they relate to your life? And how does the Way of Wonder and this 4-part methodology of unity, integration, what were the last two?
Okay, unity, integration, intention,
Intentionality
and initiative.
and initiative. How do those 4 kind of tie in and paint that picture for where we might find ourselves in uncharted territory, in a shifted dimension where reality is altered itself in a way that may not be conducive to an easy breezy enjoyment of our life.
Well, we spoke last time about all the biographical stuff of the unwanted reality and the miracles that occurred during that unwanted reality.
Yes.
Okay.
That even when everything is just utter shit, beautiful moments still exist.
And the mystery of that is, and this is fundamental to understanding the Way of Wonder, is mystery. Not everything is obvious by analysis or by even speculation of people. The metaverse universe is far more complicated than any set of algorithms we want to try to apply to it. And so that's part of what Job is all about in that, is that they keep experiencing these shifts. They're all purposeful and meaningful, and yet they seem random. But taken in total, it's not random at all. It's just nonlinear. And the idea of nonlinear reality is very upsetting to people because they like things to be consequential. And sometimes the consequence of our actions is far removed from the initial thing, or sometimes the consequences precede whatever our initial. See, nonlinearity is again another quantum concept that crosses paths. So the victim in all of what I'm talking about is certainty. There's really no point in trying to, expect or create certainty. That the best we can hope for is do the best we can do and hope for a reasonably good outcome. But based on whatever the wonder of our lives might be. We don't always know what's best for us, but we always think one of the common things that people have is they try real hard to get something that they want. And when they wind up with it, they wind up not wanting what they got. Because, well, there was just things they didn't consider in the bargain. So wonder, the way of wonder is characterized by it's always surprising, but it's delightfully surprising. Rarely is there a disappointment. Matter of fact, I can't think of a single instance that I'm aware of where when we're walking in wonder, that we wind up with a disappointment. But people often factor in disappointment into whatever their approach to life might be. And when they don't achieve it, it's disorienting. Living in the way of wonder is not living in certainty. You can't be certain it's going to happen. You can't be certain when, where, or if it'll be part of the journey. So, and that's part of what mythogenics is all about, is trying to help us prepare ourselves for an uncertain world in a nonlinear way with interface modes that allow us sometimes to have some say in it. Unity is these are ideas I got basically from the Bible. Looking at Jesus's approach to prayer. He and the Father, I and the Father are one. Unity. Garden of Gethsemane. If it's your will, let this cup pass from me. Your will be done. That's integration. Intentionality. If you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to that mountain, move over there, and it would go. And the idea of initiative is basically the whole salvation experience as presented in the Gospels. Jesus has taken initiative in making things, changing the world. Those are the paths, those are the modes, those are the ideas. I share that with people, but they oftentimes, they don't think of Jesus in different ways. They don't see the modality. They just don't think that way. So this is an unusual thing that I'm suggesting. But I find that it's justified in the things that people say are the foundations of their faith, Scripture. If it wasn't justified, why would it be there? I and the Father are one. The idea of unity is I and the universe are one. I and the Father, I and the universe. We can. That's a valid mode of participation in the world. There are great people who have expressed it. I think of Gandhi, for instance. He was not. He didn't have a particular set agenda. He just is participating in the unfolding. And he said, one of the most powerful things he said is, become the change you want to see in the world. It begins with us. That's a pretty big responsibility when you stop to think about it. But if I and the Father are one, I don't have to worry about things. I don't have to, look at the lilies of the field. They neither reap nor sow, but they're, robed in splendor. So, the idea of, I don't know if anybody else but me has ever had the idea of bargaining with God. I've had a lot of bargains. So the integration thing is part of, prayer life. And there's a wonderful movie called The End, which it all begins with and ends with Burt Reynolds is the main character, bargaining with God. If only he could be a better swimmer. He was committing suicide. He would swim to shore. And so his bargain with God is, if you give me the strength to get back to the shore, I'll give you 50% of everything I earn. I'm talking gross, God. He gets there. And I'm ready to give you that 10% right now. It's a comic way of talking, but we do that with them. Commonly, people will do that. Matter of fact, in her book about near-death experiences, Kubler-Ross talks about the stages of dying. One of them is bargaining.
Mhm.
So it's not totally my experience. I'm just commenting on what other people have suggested. And the idea of intentionality, that's the whole secret thing. Not much of a secret, but it's not as easy as people think. You set your mind on something, but you have to have that cooperation of it's relationality. But relationality of it seems like the impersonal universe. We have a relationship there, mythogenically speaking, anyway. And the idea of initiative, I'm going to go do this thing, and the scriptural term is prosper the work of our hands. You bless me in what I do. You will bless me in what I do. So these are the modes of integration with the way of wonder, which leads us to the Job thing, because Job is really about the way of wonder. Particularly, it goes all the way, the cycle of the book. I don't want to ruin it for anybody, but it goes all the way to the end. And death is not like one would expect. There again, there's a relationality that's very, very prevalent. The relationship of the primary character and the secondary character, female. Their relationship grows through all the wonder that they experience. And at the end, what is the wonder of that? It's an interesting question that they leave you with, but at least I find so.
Well, I mean, I think Heinlein manages to very adeptly and also subtly bring up some very complicated dynamics that especially Christian religion has had some hiccups with over the years. The difference between living your faith and living your life. And when the two bifurcate and are not in alignment, what do you do? Just for the point of introducing this concept a little bit, the protagonist of Job is a Protestant minister in the reality that he originates in, and has a wife and a congregation. And he falls in love with Margaret on this cruise that he's on. And Margaret shifts the realities with him. They stay the constant, not his wife. She gets left behind, and he's kind of tortured between this love that he has and, all of his, I guess you would say, religious trappings for the life that he had built based off of what he believed to be correct at the time. And Heinlein kind of takes us through this journey that stands some of those preconceived notions on their head and says, from a compassionistic perspective, some of those things although they're true and good and virtuous and correct in certain regards, that's not the end all be all of the story. There's a complexity, there's
Yes.
nuance and subtlety in things. And how does mythogenics and the way of wonder deal with that? Is there any opportunity to leverage mythogenics to help kind of create that roadmap through extremely difficult situations where there is no correct answer and someone's going to get hurt, you know? Or is it just a way of better understanding these things in retrospect after they've happened? And rather than utilizing it as an active navigation system in the moment itself, is it more of a way to decode and understand experiences that you've already had?
Well, mythogenics starts with the fundamental question of who am I? You know, am I my upbringing, my, you know, training, my experience, or is
My
there some
trauma.
is there some core reality to who I am? And this leads us to what it's kind of the pathway here is, we're all living a myth. What myth are we living, or whose myth are we living? What myth would I choose to live if I, you know, and then the fourth one is to live the myth that you choose. And you see that all unfolding in the, I forget the main character's name at this point because he's two people.
Mhm.
But he was trying to decide who am I. There's a big dilemma in the whole story. And then what constitutes, and this is one of the rubs in real life, is between spirituality and religiosity. You know, religion tells you who you are, but spirituality allows for you to discover who you are. It's not, you don't inherit it, you don't adopt it, you can adopt it from somebody else, you can adapt it from somebody else, but it's a do-it-yourself project to discover what is the reality of this soul that I happen to be in this life. And the mythology of ourselves is wrapped up in a lot of things that we experience or believe. Belief is fundamental to everything, because it's belief that makes the really like intentionality. You have to believe that you can actually affect outcomes. You know, there's hope and there's belief. They're similar in a lot of ways, but they're not the same. You know, hope leaves room for doubt, leaves room for disappointment. Belief, on the other hand, doesn't doubt, it just expects that what is hoped for outcome will be delivered at just in time. So that's our Job connection is what is the outcome desired, because the desired outcome of the main character was to be in eternity with Marguerite. And it's interesting in the play, the way the book unfolds, the wife shows up and said, "Death till death do us apart.
And now I'm free.
I'm dead. I'm free of you."
Right.
You know, so, but it's in death that it makes this spiritual marriage of two characters life-giving and sustaining. There's a there's a concept it's an ancient spiritual concept. It's called the wedding of heaven and earth, hierogamos, that the earth and heaven wed at some point. Now, the belief is that it's on earth, but it might need not be just entirely on earth. It could be, because that wedding is beyond the vows until death do us part. Death is not a sin as an ending. Death is just another step in the ongoing relationship of two souls engaged in the pursuit of total innocence.
Which is an interesting contemplation, right? When you get to the point of walking this journey and saying, as you mentioned with with Jesus saying, I am God and God is me. We're one and the same. And the universe is inextricable from that. So the universe is also God and it's one and the same. Recently, I came across a short story called The Egg that I shared with you. Forgive me because I can't recall the author at the moment. It's an interesting little exercise in expanding your consciousness to think about the oneness of all things, right? In the short story, it takes place after an entity has died and it finds himself in this after place, talking to another being, and that being is kind of a godlike, but through the course of that conversation, the authority figure that he's walking with, who is both a parent as well as a god and all these other things, says, no, you're my child, but you're also everybody that's ever lived, right? Going back to the whole nonlinear thinking, not only are you this person who just died, you're going to be somebody else. And you were a peasant woman in China in the 8th century, and you were Napoleon Bonaparte, and you were, Donald Trump, and you were Gandhi himself. You have been everyone. It's kind of the concept of this, and it's not separate. It's just there's these divisions of consciousness where you don't remember those lives was kind of the assertion of the story, but that it's all part of this journey for that consciousness to evolve and grow. And that any interactions you have with anyone is really still an interaction with yourself. How does that tie into the framework of the way of wonder? I mean, is that a natural extension of it? Is that a challenge to it? Is it a false understanding?
Well, the false understanding is that somehow it's exclusive. It's a shared reality. For instance, this idea of being another person. Well, you don't have to be exclusively the other person. You can be shared there for a while to get some experience. It might be necessary for one to have both. The way of wonder is shared, and the positions are not necessarily interchangeable, but they shift, they switch, based on what one of the important things I think to put at the heart of everything is love. That we are the creative act of love. Infinite divine love felt that we were so worthwhile. We're here. Now, a lot of people will dispute that, but I don't, because I experience that love. When we experience miracles, we're experiencing that love. When the $1,500 showed up in the mailbox, that was just sheer love. It wasn't. It was gift. Maybe that's a better way of talking about it rather than just say love, which has a lot of ramifications to it. It's the idea that everything is gift. Everything we are has been given to us. Everything that we hope for will be gifted to us. And gift is everything. And which makes the four elements of spiritual life, in my estimation, so important. Fundamental one is acceptance. I accept that I'm a gift, that my life is a gift. Everything is gift around me. Gratitude, the only reasonable response to the gift that I'm given is to be grateful for. Great gratitude is a habit that many of us have not cultivated. So part of the spiritual journey is cultivating the gift of gratitude. Trust. The idea of the way of wonder has got some terrifying aspects to it. Is this going to be the time that the universe fails? Am I, there's the test of faith. So it's not certain. It's always waiting on a gift. Will the gift arrive? And the last one is surrender. I've arrived. I am where I'm supposed to be. There is no other thing to do. There's no better place to be. There's just this moment in the eternal now. That's one of the basis of all spiritual systems is to surrender to this moment, this now, this being there without reference to something that isn't or someplace that's other. So it's just surrender to yes. And those four elements, acceptance, gratitude, trust, and surrender, form the basis of well-being. I can live in that state. I will be better. So, acceptance, gratitude, trust, and surrender. Amen.
Some water.
Sorry.
Got some phlegm. Look a little dry mouth.
I'm talking.
Yes, it happens.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, any comment?
I don't know that it's a point of commentary. Just listening as you're sharing.
Okay. So, if the way of wonder manifests itself, I accept that. I'm grateful for that. I trust that it's all from divine right order, and I surrender to whatever the outcome of all that may be. Or I accept that it didn't show. One of those, if the difference between expectation and acceptance is enormous. And there are people who expect, who demand, who command, justify. That's a different kind of spirituality. We don't expect, we accept. We don't demand. We're just grateful for it. We trust that it'll all work out. Surrender to this moment in time.
And we've kind of characterized that as far as our internal conversations is all things are as they must be, and I am where I'm intended to be in this moment in time. As painful, difficult, and complicated as that may be to accept.
Yeah.
when expectation doesn't deliver and you're left with that warm, wet feeling.
Yeah. Those are two concepts that are in the book Soul Solid, which is we are when all things are as they must be. People have trouble with that.
Well, yes, because when it's not what you want it to be, then surrendering yourself and trusting that it's what must be.
Yes. People, painful, difficult, and complicated are not what life is supposed to be. Life is supposed to be something else. But who says? Where did that come from? This mythogenic says that this is true. Life is painful, difficult, and complicated. Doesn't need to prove anything. It doesn't need to defend or attack, or that's just the way things turn out to be. Doesn't mean that's the last word, because life is those things. It's gonna be worth accepting, grateful, trusting, and surrendering to what it is. I think the person on their deathbed who surrenders and says, it's finished, I'm done. What's next? Is different than the person who fights and says, oh, I don't want this, fights to the very end. I don't know anything about what they are experiencing, but what you hear and see, I think accepting that there are painful moments, there are difficult moments, there are complicated moments. And this moment is maybe all of those, or maybe none. They surrender to whatever it is.
Just letting that soak in for a minute.
It's a lot. Easy to say, but to live with the consequences of it are rather profound. So in terms of mythogenics is preparing us for final journey, which is what religion says that they're doing. But religion has mythogenic elements, and mythogenics has religious elements, but they're not synonymous. They're co-evolutionary, because people had to deal with the fact of final moments long before religion came along. The first burial, in fact, in history was 100,000 years ago, where there's attention paid to the remains of an individual, and they weren't necessarily religious trappings that were left. Those came later. As people develop religion, part of that is developing for the reality of final separation. Is there something beyond this moment? The cave paintings in Lascaux and Altamira intimate that human beings are starting to grasp, they infer there's reality beyond the face of the rock. And that same thing is true in life. There's the face of the rock in life, and there's reality beyond that. You can't prove it, but there's a lot of literature these days on near-death experiences, where people who come back from the other side have things to say and things to share about what they experienced. Many of them are very similar. but most of them are very hopeful, hope-filled. And the people that have undergone that experience aren't afraid of death any longer. So in a way, it validates this mythogenic positive approach to final moments in the experience beyond, which is what a great deal of my literature is about how religion tries to co-opt that. You know, the reality of it existed first, and then people who are basically catering in favor of the king get involved and try to tell the story of how it all. You have to be worthy of that experience. Maybe not. Mythogenics says that worthiness is not part of but openness to the experience itself is the journey. What a mystery.
And despite all that, you still choose to be religious.
Well, because religion has ethical dimensions to it as well. What does it constitute? What constitutes, morality? See, morality is one of the great inventions of mankind. It says
Is it?
yeah, see, those of us who are cynical think that that's not, but the idea of, see, we're experiencing this today with this idea of racism. It's not moral, it's immoral.
No, absolutely.
But you have two competing systems, because some of the moral systems have been bastardized to support, like slavery was not against Christianity.
Which was a great moral failure.
See, Christianity never condemned polygamy, never condemned prostitution, never condemned slavery. Now, those are all considered immoral.
And depending on who you are, right? I mean, there are plenty of folk who, it's Pride Month currently. We're in June right now. And, there's the entire LGBTQIA plus spectrum, right? That according to religious institutions, that entire community is immoral.
Right.
But they're just people living their life as they were made and as their circumstances
because of
unfolded.
They're trying to conflate religion and morality, and they're not the same. IA, what is that IA? I'm not familiar with that.
I wish I was better educated. I said I wish I was better educated on all of the acronyms. I believe, I don't know. But there's polyamorous people, right? That derive lots of meaning and love and community and support through these relationships, which are not the heteronormative monogamous, this is the way to live your life. And from a practical life perspective, in some ways, there are advantages to that, right? Multiple incomes, not putting all of your trust and faith in a single partner to be everything that you need to be, which, I think maybe one of the toxic myths that, comes from morality is that we often are taught through sociological influences that the whole happily ever after syndrome, right? Everybody has this perfect person that's out there for them, and if they find that person, they're going to have this great life. And, once they're married, like the rest of it doesn't matter, right? It's that happily ever after moment. There's been a lot of great fun recently where, Disney even came back and started reimagining some of those things, and some fan fiction came up about, what happens after the happily ever after. What does that look like? Humanizing that experience a lot. But how does morality go? And, if you are living in any type of a morally correct world, how can you discount other people?
Well, how is inexplicable? It happens.
Or why? Why would you?
Because, see, I come from the theory that all behavior is motivated. What is the motivation? Is to look at it. And I see that the primary motivation for most behavior is energy. We get energy from the behavior, we get energy into the behavior. It's what do you call that? Mutuality. So that if hating somebody gives you energy, then you're going to do more of it. And you look at the faces and the voices of people who are expressing hatred. It's frightening, the energy.
That's ugly. Yeah.
There's an esoteric thinking. There's a term. I'm not going to go into the etymology, but there's the idea of groupthink, mob mentality. It comes from an ancient Greek word called the egregore. Egregore is this kind of monster. It exists in group mentality. And once it gets lit, there's no like a mob, a lynch mob. They're filled with hatred and they're unstoppable. We're going to go do that. Mythologically speaking, I don't know of any resistance to that kind of mentality. What is anti-egregore? The only thing I can think of is just its truth. Stand for truth. See, I look at a lot of the stuff that's going on politically. It's a monstrous groupthink. It's egregore. So how do we live beyond the egregore? Stand for the truth.
That could be a potential title for a subsequent book to Soul Solitude is Life Beyond Egregore.
Thank you for the time. So, anything else we need to talk about today?
The world is your oyster. This is your system of beliefs and your framework. So, is there anything more that you feel we should include into this particular session? Or
we've covered a lot of ground. The idea of these spiritual modes, called soulcraft modes, of participating in the way of wonder, is a big deal. Just to recap, it's unity, intention, integration, and initiative.
Now, does the order matter? Because the first run through it was unity, integration, intentionality.
I don't know that the order matters. It's arbitrary. Those who have whatever mode you have is most likely the mode that's supposed to be on top of the pile.
Well, and I think it's a good starting point or a good takeaway for, I think, anyone would really be that last one, the inertia. If you feel like you're not where you want to be or need to be, Just do something. Doesn't have to be huge, you know, it doesn't have to be Herculean in any way, shape, or form. It could be something very, very small. But something is better than nothing. And a lot of little somethings over time will create a very dramatic difference in your trajectory.
Let's hold that to be our truth.
And trust, acceptance, gratitude, and surrender. All right.
Amen.
Amen.